before the lockdown, socially engaged practice was the big buzzword of the pre-Rona art landscape. Everyone was into it. Artists were flocking to local town halls across the country. Arts Council applications have a section where you have to talk about the socially improving effects of your project in order to get funding.
Socially engaged practice can be described as an art form where the fundamental material is the relationship between the artist and a community, the process of their relationship. A community can mean anything. Trans people, the people who live on an estate, a knitting group, muscle gays, 3 people who fell down a well, 40 to 50 feral hogs. The idea is that the process of the relationship building will reveal important truths and needs kept unwittingly secret by the voiceless underclass that the artist chooses to work with. The artist heroically gives voice to these people. Although there are sometimes artworks made as a result of the process of interaction, usually public work like sculpture or a wall painting or a play, oftentimes the process of working together when shown in a coherent and understandable manner in a gallery or maybe even a trendy warehouse is the artwork itself.
But we should probably be asking ourselves some questions, like, why do we need an artist to give people voices? Don't they have them already? Who is the artist showing the process to in a coherent and understandable manner? What does coherent and understandable mean? For what purpose? And what is the dynamic of power between the artist and the community they're working in?
The Marxist anthropologist Michael Taussig describes the anthropological findings of colonists transmitted back to the colonial metropole through pictures, descriptions, field recordings as a form of cannibalism. The captured reality has now become the coloniser's object, which the coloniser owns. It is displayed, it is known. The colonist cannibalises the soul of the colonised by capturing their reality through methodological research, which is necessarily violent because it's forcing the colonised into the violent world of the coloniser. The colonial act, Taussig reminds us, is something which is not historical, but which is constantly happening again and again.
Edward Said, who influenced Taussig's ideas, described the colonial encounter as a separation of the world into an us and a them. The world of the us is defined by the boundaries of the them, the borders of which can be seen through the us's extensive research and statements about the them. These statements, said over and over, create a power dynamic between the us and the them, a reality. In creating an us and a them, and constantly reinscribing it, a whole new world is created. The us becomes an expert in the them, who aren't necessarily bad or violent, just different and a bit strange and maybe even something to be pitied. The us writes about the them, makes nice documentaries and paintings and novels about the them. The them is mute. The us speaks, ventriloquist-like, through the them. The them internalizes what the us has taught. The them has become powerless, at least for as long as this relationship holds, which for the us is hoped to be forever. Neither the us nor the them can return back to the world before this split occurred.
So we've been talking about colonialism, but let's go back to art.
Oh, right, yeah.
It's easy to say that these two things are not at all connected, that the process of colonisation is not the same as making an artwork. But here we are describing a logic which is endemic in our society. Colonial logic is everywhere, it's deep in our daily lives. The way we talk to people, how we think, how we view ourselves. Because it's so embedded, it's hard to see, but if we name it, we can glimpse at its contours. It's placed in a short film made after 3 months on an estate by a white middle-class artist, directing working-class people of colour in a gallery, not also serving up another experience to be cannibalised, like the ancestors of the gallery goers did 2, 3, 400 years ago. Is this not an act of colonisation?
Taussig says that all interactions, even cannibalism and especially colonialism, are a thing which affects both parties. The coloniser colonises and is changed by that event. The colonised is colonised and is changed too. The artist makes an artwork alongside others, yet the power dynamic remains. In fact, the power dynamic is created during this unequal exchange. What is the power dynamic embedded in a piece of socially engaged art? Is the artist doing research with all that entails? And when you make a piece of socially engaged art, are you subverting the potential of rebellion, consciousness-raising political activity into an artwork? Have you invented a voice of the people for people who definitely had voices before you showed up? Are you cataloguing, categorizing, defining an us and a them?
It might be tempting to dismiss all this murky stuff by saying, well then we shall just get ourselves a self-identified working class artist of colour to do the same thing. We fixed it. Not only have we fixed the awkward disconnect between maker and subject, we've shown how far the art world has come. We've proven that the meritocracy is real, and that if another working class artist of colour can't make a good piece of socially engaged practice, well, maybe they're just not a good artist.
This avoids specificity and flattens out difference, which is often another implicit aim of socially engaged art. It ignores that the stages a working class person of colour goes through in order to get to the stage where they can make a successful ACE application, systematically strips them of everything that could relate them to the people they then are supposed to make artwork with. The art industry necessarily removes people from their community so that they can become an individual, to be planted back into that community as a spy.
I'm the only person that I know from my road, from my primary school, from my secondary school to study fine art, let alone at a prestigious London art school. To assume that this is because I'm better than anyone else from my community is dangerous, but this is the type of meritocracy that often goes unchecked. The stripping back of layers of opportunity before one even gets through the door of an elite institution becomes forgotten quickly as the necessarily communal identity of working class becomes something to add to your artist bio, to make you stand out from the posh people in your class, to link up with other working class artists, invariably those who also went to art school and are in art scenes, whose main complaint is not being successful enough. The art didn't provide the escape route from rejection that we were promised. What do? Do we go back to our estate, where perhaps we were referred to as a ponce, maybe rightly so, and get funding to talk to people we were desperate to get away from? I'm not the community. Yet when art projects come to my hometown and want untouched, authentic spokespeople for the community, sometimes I'm who they end up speaking to. I went to a talk about the local art community. It was me and about 15 older locals, mainly women, many of whom run a small art gallery in the upper levels of the shopping centre, which mainly shows paintings. The paid facilitator raised some questions about who gets to be called an artist, imposter syndrome, and how different kinds of art can be recognised. One older lady said that all kinds of art happens at her local church, at the community centres, and why does it need to be brought out of its context and shown elsewhere, or to be compared to the standards of London-centric contemporary art scenes? Why indeed? At the end, the facilitator came up to me and asked me to come along to one of the next sessions, this time in a different, more middle-class area of Essex, promising that this one would be better.
It can be tempting in the face of this double consciousness to double down on one's identity, but this is disingenuous to the varied experiences of the demographic you might find yourself in. Edward Said was Palestinian, and he was also upper class, privately educated, and his father was an American citizen. His work benefits from an understanding of the contradictions of his existence, and in turn the contradictions of the system that placed him there. If we are generous and the goal of socially engaged practice is for a community to have a nice time, learn something new, get to know each other and make something interesting, then what is the role of the artist? The artist becomes administrator, the artist's practice becomes funding applications. If the community is the one making the art, then why can't the community get the funding? The role of the artist is enshrined as a separate entity to the community. The artist becomes the go-between of the local authority, the Arts Council, and the community. The artist can execute the work and leave in a cloud of dust onto the next town like a hired gun.
This transient life is not much fun for the artist. People don't generally get into art so they can single-handedly conjure a community in a town they've never been to. It's good to break down the solitary, singular genius notion of the artist, but I don't really feel like socially engaged practice has done this. It's instead just added more required skills to the list of things an artist is able to do: social worker, politician, seductress. There are many people I know who are great at organising, good at chatting to people, just generally bringing good vibes to the table. None of these people are artists. None of them would have much luck with an Arts Council application. To succeed in socially engaged practice, the ability to communicate with the funding body and the broader art world and its powers is much more important than the ability to communicate with the community. I mean, who's going to listen to them anyway?
Being part of a community, that is, being a member of a marginalised group, being working class, and necessarily living in some degree of communality, even if it begins and ends with chatting to people at the bus stop, is a very nice way to live. It's something that requires spare time and solidarity. Community has been systematically destroyed in England, from the closing down of the mines to the way that young black men in cities are targeted by police and migrant communities who live in fear of ICE fans. Why then, at the same time that communities are constantly under attack, is community such a buzzword in a thoroughly capitalistic art world? Everything can be a market. In fact, neoliberalism says everything is a market, and we are just market actors. If things don't think they're a market yet, you need someone to convince those things that they certainly are markets, and very nice ones too. One of the most important markets is the relationship between people, and a group of people is generally called a community. Luckily, we've got some socially engaged practice for that. The artist is hired as a worker, converting the relationship between people into a sellable commodity. Before the artist entered into the relationship of the collection of people the artist is making the work with, those relationships were simply relationships, which is kind of scary because who knows what sort of things could arise out of that space, like maybe a militant revolutionary group or an embroidering circle. The artist is tasked with the serious job of turning those relationships into a product, of breaking open a new market, of converting the field of relationships into something intelligible to capitalism and no longer mysterious and dangerous.
Artists are often blamed for gentrification, which is kind of unfair because they are only complicit players in a game controlled by property developers and speculators. But we can draw a parallel here to the way that artists historically lived in poorer, ethnically mixed areas because the rent was cheap. Historically, many of these people would be themselves marginalised. They'd make art, generate buzz, rich people would descend, the area would be admired for its idiosyncrasies, but soon new white middle class implants would make noise complaints feel uncomfortable in an Asian supermarket or Caribbean cafe and require a kind of bland, safe approximation of culture to displace them. This process has become quicker and more mechanical each time it happens, with local councils purposefully seeking out artists to live in the area, as both artist and faggot become more legitimate career choices, and certain artists and faggots find themselves among the second wave of white middle class adopters.
So it goes with artists tasked with breaking ground in a new city or borough of culture. They don't even necessarily have to do the hard work of living in a place for a certain amount of time. They can be shipped in with a budget, a litmus test to see if commuters might want to live in, for example, Margate or not. Sometimes it works, Walthamstow, sometimes it doesn't, Hull. In his 2013 series of Wreath lectures, broadcast on Radio 4, Grayson Perry said that property developers should pay artists to live in places, with the knowledge that the artist's presence would add to the market value of housing in the area. Everyone cheered. Recently, arts organisations have teamed up with local authorities and housing associations to offer reduced rate housing to artists. It's easy to see this as a nice gesture, but it's even easier to see this as a way to get out of building council houses. If one is an artist, one can live for up to 2 years in a condemned council block in Thamesmead for £1,000 a month. One can live in an artist community. It's important that artists see themselves as a community of self-contained small businesses, rather than as workers. Community, as a word, offers a sense of meaning without being something useful, like a union.
It's worth thinking about what the state of the state is like now. The NHS and social services have been gutted, mental health services, childcare, green spaces and public spaces, no more council houses getting built, the waiting lists for what's left are long and getting longer. It's very possible that people could get understandably angry, and arguably they already have. So who's going to do the palliative care needed to keep this necrotic system going and do it for very cheap? Artists seem like a good bunch because we're being taught that art is a calling.
The notion that art and social justice are intertwined, says the writer Yasmin Nair, has spread to all levels of the art and funding world, but it manifests itself most clearly in various public projects that take upon themselves the responsibility to not only make art, but also heal entire communities, end quote. To riff off Kipling, it's the artist's burden. And isn't that the sleight of hand that neoliberalism does? It's a parasite feeding off our emotions, our humanity, and making us feel guilty.
This feeling of guilt that comes from doing something as masturbatory as art often drives the move to socially engaged practice. In 2017, I graduated and temporarily moved back home to my parents and started planning a short film about a half-demolished shopping centre nearby. I enlisted some friends to help. We used my camera and it became a satirical mockumentary with sci-fi overtones. Then I saw that some of the empty shops had become community spaces used by charities. Oh no, my silly little vanity project felt pretty facile in comparison. Halfway through, I got some funding and decided what I should really do is a workshop, like ones I'd heard of in London. Surely I, a 21-year-old art graduate, had something useful to give back to my community. I went and chatted to the two charities and they agreed to let me use their basement for filming. I made a small donation afterwards. I also put on a costume making workshop with a couple of friends, which no one attended. Actually, to be fair, 5 older women came and got on with their own crocheting, kind of side-eyeing my googly eye focused endeavours. It was a very humbling and awakening experience. If you watch the film, there's not really any indication that one of the extras is a lady who runs the local charity, or that I made a small donation after the filming. The film itself would likely not be considered social practice, but it would have been quite easy for me to spin that workshop so it seemed like a success and use that false clout to get my foot on the ladder. In an art world that has muddied ideas of what skill is, you can really do a workshop on anything.
If socially engaged art acts as a cheap, social democratic style concession to the brutality of capital, if everything is really wrapped up so deep in capitalist rationality, what are we going to do?
It's very possible and even probable that we have set up socially engaged art to fail in this video, that we have artificially set its limits. We are constrained by our own experiences, our life, our principles and our ideology.
I'll be honest with you. I was a socially engaged artist for 3 years and I did okay for myself. I did socially engaged art and folks in Taipei, in London, got fancy touring gigs in different countries, and what did it achieve? Very little for me, because I'm not actually very good at organising, and actually it turned out I was just trying really hard not to be trans. And what did my art do for the people I worked with? Very little, because what was I but a visitor at best, an invader at worst, foisting my art onto people without their consent and without compensation? Was I helping with people's housing needs, combating the gentrification of the town, which was slowly but surely driving people out, helping end decades of indigenous genocide from systemic state-endorsed capitalist terror?
What art has truly changed your life? Art has definitely changed mine, for better or worse. It's kind of patronising to imagine that the public can't understand art unless they're complicit in the making, unless they're pandered to. Anyone can, and many do, make things all the time. What they lack is the time and resources to do so. Socially engaged practice could offer this, but is rarely able to do so because it's focused on outcome. There are times when I was a kid where creators would come to my town or school and do something cool that I could engage with under a set framework, and it inspired me to go to art school and then leave and work in the service industry for 3 years. Art didn't really change my material conditions, but how could it? All this really means is that there's no simple way to opt out for the dynamics of exploitation in the art industry or of wider society. Anything which claims to have fixed this should be looked at with suspicion. By acknowledging one's role, you can start to work against it. But if we allow art to retain its mystique, we can't do that. Taking something apart doesn't spoil it any more than studying art means you can't enjoy it anymore. But wait, art school made me hate art.
The use value of social practice can easily misdirect ire. People in power can acknowledge that some art is masturbatory and useless and silly, but they will often hold up the naked performance art of a gay person as an example of this, rather than a painting in the National Gallery or a contemporary sculpture. You can quickly become conservative. The art that is made, however bad or boring, is not really the problem here, but the symptom. Art is not equipped to fix social problems. The creative sector is no better or worse than any other industry, and we should equally not expect it to give up without a fight. Most people in positions of power in art will not be willing to give up their jobs in order to tear down the system. Equally, you won't be able to get a paid job as a revolutionary. It's fine to compromise to get a paid role. It's also wonderful to make art, but let's not get it confused with doing the work, which will not always be fun. Art can help us imagine what could be. It can provide a shared language and a way of communication. Art's role could be to make the revolution irresistible.